Bobby asked me to do this class, I look forward to it, but this is probably one of my favorite chapters, because I always like speculating on who are the two witnesses of Revelation chapter 11. So we'll go right into the text, and then before we witness, we'll talk about something else. Then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, "Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it." So the question arises, will there be a future temple in Jerusalem? Now, at the beginning we said some interpret this book as already fulfilled, and so they would maybe say this refers to the temple that was destroyed. But as from a futurist interpretation, what we're doing, this seems to imply there will be a temple. Now we know the history of the temple. King Solomon built the first one, it was destroyed. And then after the captivity, they rebuilt it under Ezra and Nehemiah, and Herod later made it more glamorous. And then Jesus said not one stone will be left upon another. And about 40 years after Jesus died, Rome came in, destroyed the temple completely, and there hasn't been one since then. And we as Christians know that now there is no temple for God to dwell in, because He dwells in all believers, so that, and as well as sacrifices, are not necessary anymore. But the remnant of Jewish people do not know that. And there's always been speculation, will there be a temple built? Now, I've said it before in this class, I've heard for years. The instruments are ready. The priests are being prepared. So this makes it sound like there will be a future temple in Jerusalem before the coming of the Lord. So if we were to look for any, I would say non-spiritual sign, like a tangible physical sign, any talk of a rebuilding of a temple, that would be one of your signs that things are about to happen. All right, then verse 2. Leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot of the holy city for 42 months. What I want to start doing now, this is our first reference to 3.5 years. And every time we have a reference, I'm going to put it up here. All right, 42 months. We'll translate that down. So 12 months in a year is 36 plus 6.5 year, 42 months. So, like I said, there's 3.5 many times in Revelation. 7 years is not mentioned once. So we have to see, do we combine the 7? There's some 3.5 different. That's what we'll discuss. And I will grant my authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Okay, that number 2. Now, what they're basing this on is a 360-day year. So, like a 30 days in a month. If you had just 30 days in a month, the year would be 360 days. We have a couple 31s. So, 30 times 12 equals 360 times 3.5 is 1,260 days. So there's your second reference to 3.5. That's the last for the day, but there'll be others in the book. And so I'll grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before me, to stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, we'll get to that in a second. All right, first let's talk about who could these witnesses be. There's mainly, when you talk of specific biblical characters, there's always 3 that come into mind, and we'll write them down too. They're always these 3. Enoch, who lived before the flood, Noah's great-grandfather. Elijah, the famous prophet of God. I forgot about the one in between, and Moses. We'll tell you why these could be and why these may not be. All right, first of all, is there any other scriptural reference to the 2 witnesses? And there is a passage and Zechariah chapter 4, if you want to go there real quickly, next to the last book in the Old Testament. Similar language used as used in Revelation here. I'll just read the first 4 verses. Then the angel who was speaking with me returned and roused me as a man who is awakened from his sleep. He said to me, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see, and behold, a lampstand all of gold with its bowl on the top of it, and its 7 lamps on it with 7 spouts." There's that 7 again that we see a lot in Revelation. "Belonging to each of the lamps which are on the top of it. Also 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl and the other on its left side." So olive trees, and if we go back to chapter 11 in Revelation, verse 4 says, "These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth." So, who are these 2 lampstands? What do they represent? Now, some people who interpret Revelation more from a spiritual perspective say they don't represent people at all, but they represent something else. I've heard some say one represents a Jew, one represents a Gentile, preaching the gospel message to the whole world. I've heard it's a representation of the church. Some say this because just, giving a symbolic, spreading the message of the Bible. I do not believe that interpretation. I believe they're literal people, and we'll get into why in a few minutes, but as we read the next few verses, it make it sound more like it's people rather than something else. But let's look at these 3 characters here. These have always been the 3 that they've never heard anyone else named from the Bible who would be these 2 witnesses. All right, okay. Case number 1, Enoch. Jeanette, you asked, did he have any children? He was Methuselah's father.
Okay.
And Methuselah
was the oldest man
ever lived. Methuselah died the year of the flood. If you calculate the years of Genesis, Methuselah's son was Lamech, and Lamech's son was Noah. So way back in the genealogies, Genesis 5. This is not very popular, but I love studying and reading about these. But if you notice, there's 10 mentioned from Adam to Noah. Almost all of them lived over 900 years. Noah's father was in his 700s, but there is one exception, and that's Enoch. And let's read about him. Genesis 5:21 to 24. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. And here's the thing, the key here. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So what is it? Is it being mysterious here? Did he die, and that's just a way of, put a kind of a veiled reference to it? But Hebrews makes it clear. Hebrews 11, the faith chapter, when it talks about heroes of the faith. In Hebrews 11, 5. By faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him. For he obtained the witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to God. So we have, without a doubt, definite statement there. Enoch never died. He lived 365 years on this earth, which now is, unheard of, but in those days would basically have been a young man or a middle-aged man. And he was taken with the Lord. If you count from that point, say the flood, was 5,000 years ago or so, depending on which version you look at. Enoch would be, several thousand years old, but living in heaven, I guess, with the Lord. So he's candidate number 1. Candidate number 2 is Moses. We're going chronologically here. And the reason they picked Moses, well, back to Revelation, we're going to read down a little bit some of the things that the 2 witnesses do. And if anyone wants to harm them, Fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. So if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. I don't know if any of you have seen Left Behind 2. They have the two witnesses there, and then a couple of the soldiers try to get too close, and fire comes out and consumes them. But so that's taking a literal thing for here. That's what it seems to be saying. It says these have the power to shut up the sky so that the rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have power. Here's the key verse here at the end of 6. And they have power over the water to turn them into blood. That's what Moses did when the plagues of Egypt. And to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. And we also know that Moses, through the Lord, through Moses, sent the 12 plagues into Egypt. So that would lead to Moses. You have the passage in Jude where it talks about the devil disputed with Michael the archangel over the body of Moses. Like, will there be some kind of reason why that happened? And then we think of the transfiguration. You remember when Jesus and the Lord appeared to Peter, James, and John, and there was Moses and Elijah together there. So was that some kind of reference to what's going to happen in the future? And you have Elijah standing to the left who has not died, and Moses to the other side who has died. And that gets us to Elijah. Of these three, he is definitely, if it would be people from passing the scripture, Elijah is definitely your strongest category for two reasons. We'll go to read his account of going into heaven briefly. I think it's 2 Kings 2. Elisha is his successor. If you ever get those mixed up, it's always alphabetical. J before S, Elijah, Elisha. And as he's about to go into heaven, 2 Kings 2, 11 and 12 says, as they were going along and talking, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, which separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind to heaven. Elisha saw it and cried out, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw Elijah no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. So Elijah was just taken up into heaven then. So Elijah also did not suffer death. And then the closing verses of the Old Testament makes one more reference to Elijah. The last two verses, Malachi 4, 5, and 6. Behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that when I will not come and smite the land with a curse. So there are your three candidates from the Bible. Enoch, because he hasn't died. Elijah, because he hasn't died in that prophecy there in Malachi. And Moses, because of the miracles, transfiguration, and the dispute over his body. Okay. Now also leave another category. Are they neither one of those three? Are they just two future men that when we're in the last days before the Lord's come, that the Lord will call out specifically and meet, what some would say, doing in the spirit of Moses and Elijah performing these miracles. So that would be your fourth option. So you have not people at all. Is it Enoch and Elijah? Is it Moses and Elijah? Or is it just two men from the present time that the Lord will choose? All right. When we'll read some more what they do and what happens to them, it really makes it sound like it's not, symbolic. I really believe they will be two literal people. I lean towards, I used to think it was Enoch and Elijah. I believe it'll just be two future men the Lord chooses. I always, for balance, said it would be cool if, the only two people who've never died come back and die. But we'll address that. But I definitely don't believe it be Moses. Okay, why do I not believe this? All right. Why do people speculate as Enoch and Elijah? All right. Hebrews 9:27. Let's go back to Hebrews. question arose, why do people say they have to die? Hebrews 9:27 says, inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment. So every man has an appointment with death, so they're saying Enoch and Elijah haven't died, so therefore this verse is saying they should die. Well, not exactly, all right? Now, on the other hand, this verse might eliminate Moses from the case. Moses has died. Why would the Lord call Moses, raise him from the dead, send him back to earth, and have him killed again? So, as Enoch and Elijah are the two who have not died, why would Moses be the only person who dies twice? So I'd say that there, in my opinion, would eliminate Moses. But I also want to eliminate Enoch and Elijah from a couple's perspectives. All right, the argument is they've never died, they have to come back and die, because everyone dies. No, everyone doesn't die. 1 Corinthians 15:51. Whenever you believe the timing of the rapture, whether before the tribulation, the middle of the tribulation, or after the tribulation, Paul tells us here, 1 Corinthians 15:51, behold, I tell you a mystery, we will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. So the people who are alive, when the rapture happens, will not die. They'll go from their mortal bodies straight into their glorified bodies. When the rapture happens, it says here, first the dead are raised up, so those who have already died in the Lord, their bodies are in the earth, their spirits in heaven, their bodies and spirit will be reunited in a glorified body, and then those who are alive and remain will go to heaven and transformed into a glorified body. So if you're living, when the Lord comes, you'll never die, that whole generation. So that being said, that doesn't mean Enoch and Elijah had to die either. I guess they went into heaven in their bodily forms and will be transformed at the resurrection. I don't know exactly, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily don't mean they could come back. Time will tell. I definitely don't believe it is Moses, but if it would be any two, I do believe it could be Enoch and Elijah. Jewish people, when they celebrate the Passover, they have a little tradition. I think it's something like this. Every year they say we come and look for Elijah to come back, and they send, I think, the youngest child to the door, just for a symbol, and open the door and see if Elijah's come back. And I always thought, wouldn't it be ironic if some family in Jerusalem was celebrating Passover year, and one little child went to the door, and this time, and there he was out there standing, preaching the gospel message. That would definitely be a sign of the return of the Lord. So there's the four interpretations, not people at all, Enoch and Elijah, Moses and Elijah, or two future believers, in which I believe it just be two future believers. Now, what is the fate of these two witnesses? Our last verse was, we talked about fire coming. They have power to shut up the sky so that the rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. And this is also kind of reference to Elijah. You remember he shut up the heavens for 3.5 years. That is the same time of this time period, 3.5 years. Power to turn the water to blood like Moses and the plagues. All right, verse 7. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. I take this to be the Antichrist. You know, we're halfway through Revelation, and this is really just a second reference to him. The first was back in Revelation 6, the first seal on the white horse, and this seems to make reference that the Antichrist will kill him. All right, we need to preach out of the scriptures, of course, and not out of anything outside of the Bible. But I used to listen to I mentioned before, the dramatized version of Left Behind, and what was funny, the Antichrist, he was like a ruthless man, Nikolai Carpathia, but at the same time, he was scared to death of these two men, who adamantly stood against him, and everything he said, he was basically conquering the world, and these men were ignoring him. And, you know, why would he wait 3.5 years to kill him? Basically because of the Lord's protections upon them. But finally, I guess at the end, it's like the Lord saying their work is done and you're gonna fulfill my will. So what is the fate of these two witnesses? All right, verse 7 tells us he's going to kill them. He will overcome them and kill them. Of course, that story doesn't end here, as we know. And their dead bodies will line the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also the Lord was crucified. So that tells us it's talking about Jerusalem. That's where Jesus was crucified. Those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. Kind of interesting, the time period, 3.5 days, which kind of corresponds to 3.5 years. So let's take a look at that a minute. You know, I've heard people say, you know, in the past, people say, how would all these, people be able to see their dead bodies in the streets? But, you know, that's readily available now. You can see anywhere all over the world all at once. And just want to talk about this here. Wicked people usually do not like to be told what they're doing is wrong. Just watch on television news when anyone stands up for something biblical, the other person usually doesn't calmly come back with a counterpoint. They just yell and scream or call them intolerant or a hater or something of that nature. These men have been preaching for 3.5 years righteousness, preaching Christ, preaching repentance, and the wicked, godly, unworld did not want to hear it. Probably all the plagues and the events of the seals and the trumpets that are going on, they're probably blaming these men for it. So they hate them. They despise them. They hate them so much. The Antichrist says once they kill these two men, just leave their bodies in the street, you know, and let them decay publicly. You know, even most people, once a person is killed, even their enemies will allow like the, respect or to take the body away. This is just like a defiance. I'm just gonna leave them here. You know, watch maybe the birds pick at their carcasses and let the whole world watch. So let's read these chapters, verse 8 through 10 again. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Those from the people and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. Those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented them, those who dwell on the earth. Maybe they're thinking, now these are dead, these are going to solve maybe the plagues and stuff that are going on. They're causing it. It's not the devil, it's not the Antichrist, it's God and his prophets. But, always, as we look back in the Bible, you like to say, what events in the past would you have liked to see, like the Red Sea split or Lazarus come forth? Here's a future event that will be interesting to see. Chapter 11, verse 11. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. Then they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. Imagine that. Sitting there, people maybe partying, mocking them, laughing at them, maybe throwing stuff at their dead bodies, and all of a sudden the voices come and life comes back into their bodies, and they're taken into heaven. Like if you went back to Enoch and Elijah, that would say, well, they fulfilled their destiny with death, their body died, and that is like a form of a rapture for them. And we'll talk a little bit about the timing of this, when this occurs. So then they're taken into heaven. I want you to notice the word, I said we come across this again, come up here. If you remember back in Revelation 4, first verse, when John first starts seeing the vision of things that will be, after these things I looked and behold a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet, speaking with me, said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place. So some have said to come up here in Revelation 4:1, and the come up here in Revelation 11:12 are both signifying forms of a rapture at different times. Those from the pre-tribulation perspective would say chapter 4 was at the beginning of the tribulation, and chapter 11 verses 12 is midway point, because it says they prophesied 3.5 years. That would be that perspective. Some would teach that their ministry, since it says 3.5 years, and that's all it ever says in this book of Revelation, is the last 3.5 years. That way, their resurrection, rapture, whatever, would occur right about the time of the second coming of the Lord, when the Lord comes back for the church. Could be either one of these two, depending on, once again, the time of the rapture. I tend to believe they will be ministering in the second half of the 3.5 years, because as we again look at these 3.5 year dates, 42 months, 1,260 days, nowhere in Revelation does it say 7 years. The only way you get 7 is if you go back to Daniel 9, that 70th week, or if you put the 3.5 years in different places, which is possible, but then you have to, put one thing upon the other. What I want to point out is that this is the first place where we saw this 3.5 year reference twice in here. It will not be the last time. And like I said, 7 years is never referenced in the book. All right, now let's finish out and see what happens at the conclusion of the chapter. And in that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. So, just the fear of the Lord came upon this place. And, in a few minutes' time, you have 2 men who were dead 3.5 days rise up to their feet and ascend into heaven. Then you have a great earthquake. People die, and this has got people's attention. And then they're saying, what is going on here? Let's repent. Let us, call upon the Lord and ask Him for His. Maybe some will, in that last second, will finally call upon Him and ask for forgiveness. And then the chapter closes out. The second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. And we'll review again. Second woe. Let's go back a couple chapters. The last verse of Revelation 8. After the fourth trumpet, these were the four trumpets and all the stuff on the hail, third of the earth, third of the plants, third of the water, a great stone or possibly an asteroid strikes the earth. And it said, then I looked, and I heard an eagle flying in the mid-heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, 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 3 times, to those who dwell on the earth, because of the remaining blast of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are about to sound. And then in the next chapter, chapter 9, after he describes the 5th trumpet, 9 verses 12, the first woe is past. Behold, 2 woes are still coming after these things. So after the 5th trumpet, it's saying there's still 2 more woes to come. Now it goes into the 6th trumpet, the 2 witnesses, their ministry on earth. And it says here at the end, after their death and this earthquake, the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. So 2 woes, 1 more to go. Also want to point out again, I'll do my lines again. Some have always said it's the seals, and it's the trumpets, then it's the bowls. But I want to describe the 6th seal. Back in Revelation 6. This is the 6th trumpet. Oh yeah, 6th seal. Revelation 6:12. I looked when he broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black and sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood. So it talks about an earthquake at the ending of the 6th seal here, and it talks about an earthquake at the end of the ministry of the 3.5 years of the witnesses. So I'm tending to believe this is the last 3.5 years of the tribulation that these witnesses are preaching the gospel. I think the earthquake and the sixth seal back in Revelation 6 and the earthquake in Revelation 11 may indeed be the same thing. And then after the second woe, we have one more section. It closes out this chapter, the seventh trumpet. So we've had 7 seals, and now this is the 7th trumpet. Then the 7th angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever." So if you go directly from the passage before, it makes it sound like this would occur immediately after the 2 witnesses are called up into heaven. Now we're going to have some familiar faces again that we've talked about in the past. The 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worship God, so we have reference to them, saying, "We give you thanks, O Lord God, the Almighty, who are and who were, because you have taken your great power and have begun to reign. And the nations were enraged, and your wrath came, and the time came for the dead to be judged, and the time to reward your bondservants, the prophets, and the saints, and those who fear your name, the small and the great, and to destroy those who destroy the earth. And the temple of God which is in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant appeared to his temple, and there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, and an earthquake, and a great hailstorm." You have 2 options here. One, you could say this has happened directly after these witnesses are taken into heaven, but also this is again like a little mini interlude. 2 or 3 times we've done this where it tells about the events that are going to happen, and then it goes into a scene in heaven. It happened in Revelation 4. It happened in, I believe, Revelation 7, where it has a little interlude, and then once again we have references to everything being wrapped up. But as we'll go into the next chapter next week, you'll see we're not finished yet. So it's not like a straight one event after the other. It's like a description of a few things, and then a scene in heaven, and then a description of a few more things, and then a scene in heaven. And then it keeps going. And it does, of course, at the end, we have the culmination at the end of the book. So that's how the first, by chapters wise, how the first half of this book is going. So some would say, we're at the half point of the tribulation, 3.5 years in, and now the great tribulation is about to start. And some would just say, this particular chapter describes the end of the tribulation, but there's still more events to come in this book. All right. Now, does anyone have any comments or questions about this, either the witnesses or the timing or anything like that, any of that nature? Have any input on this?
It's interesting right now with the COVID, how they're getting every child is getting a laptop, and they're making sure there's internet all throughout, which I know we have TVs anyway, but it just seems like another step to make it possible that everybody's gonna see this.
You just see somebody
Their phone
mess
is-
on your phone, two whatever they would call it, 2 annoying, mischievous men of Israel, shot down by our leader, or something like that. And then 3.5 days later, get another notice. I don't even know how exactly they describe. You're not going to believe that.
Yeah, right.
Click on this link and watch what happened, because cameras are everywhere now, and they're constantly placing. As far as the timing, I believe, like I said, they'll be in the second half. If you believe the first half, I guess basically the rapture would occur somewhere. All of a sudden, 144,000 Jewish believers would start proclaiming the gospel message around the world, and these 2 men would show up. So if this is in the first half of the tribulation, there needs to be a temple built, because it says clear here, there's a temple, measure the temple. Now if you're going to take them literally, so if you're taking the 2 men literally, you're going to take the temple literally. There is a peace treaty in the Middle East going to be signed this week.
Yeah.
And just makes you wonder when you hear that. And always, people say the big thing, that would be like the thing that would show Israel that people mean business if they give them land back or allow them to build the temple there. And I've also heard they could theoretically make it work with the Dome of the Rock still there, because the actual temple was just to the left or something. So it's interesting to see. So when you watch for events, you know, the Lord said in the last days He'll pour out His Spirit. That's one of the biggest signs, and we see how the Pentecostal charismatic movement has basically changed the church the last 100 years. But He also, you know, talks about Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the time the Gentiles have been fulfilled. And, you know, where the Gentiles, and maybe Lord said the time the Gentiles has been fulfilled, I'm focusing back on the nation of Israel. And one of the things to look for is a temple. Now we know, like I said earlier, the first part of the message, we don't need a temple anymore. A temple was for sacrifices. Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice. Temple is a representation of where God dwells. We know God dwells inside of all of us, but His people, the Jewish people, for the most part, do not accept that message. And then when these events begin to unfold, they're finally going to come to accept the Lord as who He is, as Messiah. Paul talks about how eventually they will come to know Him, or at least a portion of Him. Anyone else have anything?
I heard some program that said that they could build the temple in a year. With the
That would-
technology and all they
yeah,
have now.
That would surprise me. So
Yeah.
a year, I mean, and I gotta think, over the years, you know, Jewish people, a lot of them have money, and I'm sure many of older Jewish person has died, has left money to, you know, to the temple fund. They probably have the resources and could just, you know, once they got the go-ahead, have a state-of-the-art temple up again.
They also say that it's most likely that the temple would be built on the site of a mosque now, and that would cause future conflict as well.
That would definitely one of my other end time movies, like I've seen them all, is a Mega Code, and in that movie they blow up the Dome of the Rock, and of course, you know, that caused all kinds of confrontation. So that's the thing; it's just so delicate there, because the forces are so hostile. But with this treaty coming out, it's like more and more nations seem to be coming with Israel. So it's interesting to see what's going to develop. Anybody else have anything?
But a tenth of the city's gonna be, that's the first I've noticed that, so that'd be Jerusalem, a tenth of that city's people, or anyways, gonna be destroyed.
And you know, and if it's at the end, it's right before the Lord returns, so, and 7,000 die, which compared to tribulation numbers, that's not that many, that's just, you know, just a minor thing, but it's still 7,000 a lot.